My name is Sophie. I am 35 years old, and I never once imagined that the most important business decision of my life would be made not in a boardroom, but at a dining room table covered in a Christmas tablecloth my mother had owned since before I was born. I want to be honest with you from the beginning, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering when a story like this one gets told. I was not a perfect daughter. I was not always easy to love. I was ambitious in a way that my family never quite understood, and I spent most of my 20s working hours that embarrassed the people around me. My sister used to joke that I was married to my laptop. My brother used to say I had ice water in my veins. My parents used to smile at those comments in a way that told me, even then, that some part of them agreed. But here is what I also was. I was the one who answered the phone at 2 in the morning when my father had his first cardiac episode, and my mother could not stop shaking long enough to call for help. I was the one who drove 4 hours in a February snowstorm to help my brother move out of an apartment he could no longer afford, after his third failed attempt at running his own contracting business. I was the one who sat with my mother through every single chemotherapy appointment 3 years ago, holding her hand and pretending I was not terrified, because someone in that room had to be steady, and it was always going to be me. I built Northlight Interiors out of nothing. That is not a figure of speech. When I was 27, I had exactly $11,000 in a savings account, a graphic design certificate from Algonquin College, and an absolute refusal to spend one more year working for someone else. I had been doing contract staging work for a real estate agency in Ottawa for almost 4 years by then, and I was good at it. I was very good at it. But the agency owner was the kind of man who liked to take credit for other people's instincts, and I had watched him invoice clients for ideas that had come directly out of my head one too many times. My parents gave me $40,000 to get started. My father sat me down at that same Christmas table and slid a check across to me with both hands, like he was passing me something sacred. My mother stood in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms folded and her eyes wet, and she said, "You are going to pay us back every single cent." I told her I would. I meant it. 2 years later, I did exactly that. I deposited $40,000 into their joint account on a Tuesday morning in March and sent my mother a text message that said simply, "Paid in full, with love." She sent back a heart emoji. That was it. That was the whole acknowledgement. I did not say anything about it because it was not the kind of family where you said things like that. You kept score silently, and you were grateful silently, and you loved each other silently. And somewhere in all of that silence, things got misunderstood in ways that took years to fully reveal themselves. Northlight grew steadily. It was never the kind of growth that made headlines. I was not trying to be a national brand. I was trying to build something honest and lasting in a city I actually cared about. By the time I was 32, I had 12 full-time employees, a client list that included 3 of Ottawa's top residential developers, and a commercial contract with a hospitality group that had properties in Ottawa, Kingston, and Halifax. I had an office on Elgin Street with real windows. I had a reputation that I had built one project at a time, by showing up when I said I would and doing exactly what I promised. My brother, in the meantime, had burned through 2 more business attempts. A renovation company that collapsed under the weight of his scheduling problems and his habit of hiring people based on loyalty rather than skill. A landscaping operation that lasted exactly 1 summer before he decided it was, in his words, beneath him. My parents had quietly helped him each time. I had known about the money from the renovation company because my mother had let it slip during a phone call. I did not know the full picture until much later. My brother came to me 18 months ago and asked me for a job. I want to be very precise about this because the details matter. He did not ask to be an employee. He asked to be a partner. He sat in my office on Elgin Street and looked around at everything I had built and told me that he thought there was a natural logic to family working together and that he had skills in project management and client relations that would complement what I was doing. I asked him what his salary expectations were. He named a figure that was higher than what I was paying my senior designer, who had 11 years of experience and a degree from Carleton. I thanked him for coming in. I told him I would think about it and get back to him. I did not get back to him. I offered him a part-time operations coordinator role at a rate that was fair for the position, not for his ego. He never responded to the offer. I should have understood then that something was shifting in the family architecture. I was so focused on my work that I missed the signals that were right in front of me. The Christmas dinner was at my parents' house in Nepean, the same house I grew up in, a red brick, semi-detached on a street lined with old maples that had been absolutely beautiful in October, and were now bare and gray against a low December sky. My mother had been cooking since the morning. The house smelled like roasting lamb and the particular cinnamon candle she bought every single year from the same shop on Bank Street. My sister-in-law was there, and her parents had driven up from Kingston, and my aunt and her husband had come in from Gatineau, and there were 12 of us around a table that officially seated 8. I had arrived last, which was not unusual for me. I had been finishing a presentation for a client meeting scheduled for the 3rd of January, and I had told my mother I might be a few minutes late, and she had said what she always said, which was that dinner would be at 6 regardless, and that if I arrived after the lamb was carved, it would not be her fault. I arrived at 6:07. The lamb had not yet been carved. I remember sitting down and noticing that my brother was already on his second glass of red wine, which was also not unusual, and that my father was quieter than normal, which I registered somewhere in the back of my mind without quite understanding what it meant. My mother brought out the salad, and my aunt made a comment about the weather, and my sister-in-law asked me about a project I had been working on in the glebe, and it was entirely, perfectly ordinary, right up until the moment when it wasn't. We were partway through the main course when my brother set down his fork and put both of his hands flat on the table. It was such a deliberate gesture that the conversation at the table simply stopped on its own, the way a radio cuts to silence when the power goes out. Every person at that table looked at him, and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as a premonition. The same feeling I get sometimes when I am about to open a contract, and I can sense before I read a single word that something is wrong with it. He looked at me. He did not look at our parents, or at his wife, or at the guests. He looked directly at me, and there was something in his face that I had never quite seen there before. Something that was trying to be confidence, and was not quite getting there. He said that he had something to share with the family. He said that there had been some conversations happening. Conversations between him and our parents about the future of Northlight. He said that our parents had, as founding investors, decided that they wanted to restructure their involvement in the company in a way that better reflected long-term family interests. He paused. He picked up his wine glass, then put it back down without drinking. Then he said that our parents had transferred their shares to him, giving him 31% of Northlight Interiors, and that he was going to be coming on in an active leadership capacity in the new year. I set down my own fork very carefully. The table was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something irrevocable has just been said out loud. My aunt was looking at my father. My sister-in-law's mother was looking at her plate. My father was looking at the tablecloth. My mother was standing in the kitchen doorway again, exactly where she had stood the night she handed me that check 8 years ago, and she was not looking at anyone. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel surprise. I want to be honest about that. I felt a kind of cold, clarifying recognition, the feeling of a theory you have been quietly testing suddenly being confirmed. I had suspected something was moving in this direction for almost 5 months. Not this exact shape of it, not this Christmas dinner with the cinnamon candle and my aunt and 12 people around a table meant for 8, but something. The late-night phone calls between my brother and my father that stopped when I entered the room. The question my mother had asked me in October, almost casually, about what I thought the company would be worth in 5 years. The way my brother had started referring to the business at family dinners as the family business, a phrase I had never once used and never would have. I had not been idle during those 5 months. I looked at my brother. He was watching me with an expression that I think was meant to communicate that this was simply business, that it was nothing personal, that surely I could be a reasonable adult about this. I looked at my father, who finally looked up from the tablecloth and met my eyes for just a moment before looking away again. I looked at my mother in the doorway. She looked like a woman who had made a decision she was no longer fully comfortable with. I reached down and picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. I set it back on the table. I said, "I appreciate you sharing that. There are a few things I should probably share with you as well." I told them about Northlight Creative Holdings, Inc. It had been incorporated in Ontario 8 months earlier, registered under my name alone, with a corporate lawyer I had worked with on a commercial lease negotiation 2 years prior. I had not mentioned it to anyone in my family. There was no reason to mention it. It was simply a new structure, a holding company, the kind of thing that any competent small business owner eventually establishes for liability and tax purposes. Nothing unusual about it at all. What I had transferred into that holding company over the preceding 4 months was slightly more unusual. Every client contract that came up for renewal had been renewed under the holding company, not under Northlight Interiors. The proprietary project management system I had spent 2 years building, which our clients used to track their projects and communicate with our team, had been relicensed under the holding company. My two most senior employees, my creative director and my operations manager, both of whom I trusted completely, had been offered new employment agreements with the holding company and had signed them. The Elgin Street office lease, which had come up for renewal in November, had been renewed under the holding company. Northlight Interiors, the original company in which my parents held a combined 31%, still existed. It had a business number and a registered address and a bank account with a balance. I will not specify other than to say it was not impressive. It had no active client contracts. It had no employees. It had no intellectual property. It had no office lease. It was, in the language my lawyer had used when we discussed this scenario, a clean shell. My brother was staring at me. I explained this calmly, because I am a precise person, and I think precision is a form of respect, even in situations like this one. I said that I wanted to be clear that I was not angry, and that I genuinely meant that, because the anger would come later, in private, where it belonged. I said that I had become aware some months ago that there were conversations happening about the company that did not include me, and that I had taken steps to protect what I had built. I said that I hoped we could all agree that what I had built belonged to me, that the sweat and the client relationships and the reputation and the intellectual property were mine, and that a 31% stake held by people who had been fully repaid their original investment 8 years prior did not entitle anyone to transfer that ownership to a third party without my knowledge or consent. My father's voice, when he finally used it, was very quiet. He said that they had taken legal advice. He said that the shares were theirs and they could do what they liked with them. I told him he was right. I said that the shares were absolutely theirs, and that he was welcome to do whatever he chose with his equity stake in Northlight Interiors. I said I just wanted to make sure he understood what Northlight Interiors currently contained. My brother said something then that I think he intended to be threatening. He said that he had his own lawyers, and that I should be very careful, that what I had done sounded to him like an attempt to devalue their shares, and that there were legal remedies for that kind of thing. His voice had gone up half a register, and his jaw was tight, and he was gripping the edge of the table in a way that was leaving small white marks on his fingertips. I said that I had full confidence in the decisions I had made, that they had been made with legal counsel, and that I was very comfortable defending them if it came to that. Then I said, quietly, that I hoped it would not come to that, because legal proceedings were expensive and stressful and rarely worth what they cost any family. The table was silent again. Outside the window, snow had started coming down, the heavy, wet kind that accumulates fast and makes the city look briefly, deceptively peaceful. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out an envelope. I had prepared it the week before and carried it with me to every family function since then, because I had known this conversation was going to happen somewhere, and I had wanted to be ready. Inside the envelope was a check made out to my parents, jointly, for $40,000. I set it on the table in front of my father. I said that this was not money I owed them. I said we all knew the loan had been repaid years ago. I said that this was something different. I said that this was the amount they had originally invested in what became my company, and that I wanted them to have it back, not as a debt but as a closing of an account. I said that I thought it was important to be clean about things. I said that I did not want money to be the reason we stopped being a family, but that I also could not allow what I had worked for my entire adult life to be handed to someone else at a Christmas dinner without consequence. My mother came fully into the room then, for the first time since the conversation had started. She sat down in her chair at the end of the table and looked at the check for a long moment, and then she looked at me, and I could see that she was trying to find the right thing to say and could not locate it. She said, "Sophie, this is not what we wanted." I said, "I know." And I did know. That was the truest and most painful thing about the whole evening. I did not think my parents were villains. I thought they were people who had spent decades quietly preferring one of their children and had finally found a way to act on it, and who had not thought carefully enough about what that would cost everyone at the table. My brother had failed. Again and again he had failed, and every time he failed they had caught him, and this time they had decided to catch him with something that was not theirs to give. My brother's wife had not said a word for the last 20 minutes. She was looking at her husband with an expression that I recognized, because I had seen it before on the faces of people who are realizing, in real time, that the person sitting next to them is not who they thought he was. I felt genuinely sorry for her. She was a smart woman and she had been married to him for 6 years, and this was not the life she had signed up for. My aunt quietly excused herself and her husband and said they would find a cab, and that the food had been wonderful, and that they loved everyone very much. Her husband patted my father on the shoulder on the way out. It was the kindest gesture of the entire evening. My brother started talking again. He said things that I will not repeat in detail because they were not his finest hour, and because I believe in allowing people the dignity of not having their worst moments catalogued forever. He said I was selfish. He said I had always been selfish. He said that I had made myself the center of everything since we were children, and that this was just the most recent version of a pattern that went all the way back. He said some other things. His wife put her hand on his arm, and he shrugged it off. I did not respond to any of it. I had nothing to prove to him and nothing to defend, and I had learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you can do when someone is trying to make you feel small is to simply decline to participate. My father told me that if I walked out of that house, I should not expect things to go back to the way they were. I stood up from the table. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I looked at my father and I said, as calmly and as clearly as I have ever said anything in my life, I understand. I looked at my mother and I said, I love you. You know where to find me. And then I put on my coat and I walked out the front door into the snow. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started the engine. The snow was coming down properly now, coating the windshield in a quiet white layer that muffled everything outside. The house behind me had its windows lit up gold, and I knew that in there, around that table, my family was having a very difficult conversation about what had just happened, and I was not there for it, and I did not need to be. I will not pretend the months that followed were easy. They were not. My brother retained a lawyer who sent a letter making various allegations about the restructuring of the holding company, and my lawyer sent back a letter explaining, with considerable precision and a set of attachments, exactly why every step I had taken was fully within my rights as the sole director of the original company. There were no further letters after that. The costs of that legal exchange came out of my own pocket, and I considered them, without any bitterness, the final accounting of the thing. My parents cashed the check. I know because it cleared. My mother called me in February, on a Sunday morning. We talked for 45 minutes. She did not apologize in words, and I did not ask her to. We talked about small things, the way you do when you are trying to find your way back to each other across a distance that has opened up unexpectedly. She told me my father's knee was bothering him. I told her I had taken on a project in the Byward market that I was excited about. At the end of the call, she said, "You were always the one who knew what she was doing," and I understood that for my mother, that was as close to an apology as she knew how to come, and I accepted it. My brother and I have not spoken since December. I do not know if that will change. I hope that someday it does. Because he is my brother and because I am not in the business of writing people off permanently. But I am also not willing to pretend that what he did was a small thing. Because it was not. He stood up at a Christmas table and tried to take something I had spent 8 years of my life building. He did it with a smile and a glass of red wine, and the confidence of a man who had never once had to truly reckon with his own failures. I am not angry at him anymore, but I am not going to forget it either. Northlight Creative Holdings had its best quarter ever in the spring. We brought on 2 new developers and expanded the commercial contract with the hospitality group to include properties in Vancouver and Victoria. I hired a studio director who had been on my radar for 2 years, a woman named Priya who had more talent in her first instinct than most people have in their entire careers. My creative director sent me a bottle of sparkling wine when the Vancouver contract was signed, with a card that said simply, "We built this." We did. That is the only fact that has ever mattered. I think about that Christmas dinner sometimes, particularly on quiet evenings when I am driving home from the office and the Ottawa River is frozen, and the city looks like the kind of place someone would invent if they were trying to describe somewhere solid and quiet and worth building a life in. I think about the moment my brother put his hands flat on that table and I felt that cold, clarifying recognition move through me. I think about the envelope in my jacket pocket, the check I had carried with me for weeks, waiting. I think about my mother in the doorway, and the way her face looked when I said I loved her on my way out the door. I did not build Northlight to prove anything to anyone. I want to be clear about that. I built it because I had something to offer, and I wanted the full weight of my own effort to belong to me, to no one else, to no arrangement I had not chosen. I built it because I am the kind of person who, when she looks at a blank wall, sees not emptiness but possibility, and I wanted a place where that instinct was the most important thing in the room. Nobody gets to give away what you built while you are still standing in it. That is not a legal principle, though it turned out to also be a legal principle. It is something more fundamental than that. It is the agreement you make with yourself when you decide, very early in your life, that the only person responsible for what happens to you is you. I am 35 years old. I have an office on Elgin Street with real windows. Outside those windows, the city I was born in goes about its business in the particular Canadian way, which is to say it is competent and a little understated and more resilient than it looks. I like it very much. I am not going anywhere. And when someone tries to take what is yours, the best thing you can do, the only thing, really, is to have already made sure there is nothing left for them to take.